The pawn shop owner slid the tray between us. It was cheap, black plastic, the kind you see in a school cafeteria, but the contents were anything but. Lying on a bed of worn, gray velvet were 3 pocket watches, their silver and gold cases dulled by a century of neglect. He lowered his voice, a low rumble that seemed to come from the center of the earth, and the words were meant only for me. Office, 2 minutes. Then he turned away, his broad back a wall of plaid flannel, and began haggling with a woman over a dusty guitar. I was dismissed, but with a promise. An instruction. My heart, a stupid, fluttering bird in my chest, did a little lurch. I pretended to examine the watches, picking one up to feel the cool, solid weight of it in my palm. My fingers, accustomed to the delicate guts of timepieces, traced the intricate engraving on the case, a hunting dog frozen mid-stride. My real focus, however, was on him. Marcus. I had known him for 6 years, ever since I opened my tiny clock repair shop 2 blocks down. He was a landmark in this neighborhood of forgotten things, a constant presence behind the counter of Second Chance's pawn. He was a big man, built like the retired lumberjack he probably wasn't, with hands that looked like they could crush stone but could handle a fragile porcelain doll with unnerving gentleness. His hair was more salt than pepper now, cropped short, and his eyes were the color of faded denim, usually holding a look of weary assessment. He saw the value in things people threw away. I always wondered if he ever saw any value in me. My life was a quiet collection of routines. I woke up. I drank black coffee. I went to my shop, a space that smelled perpetually of lubricating oil and old wood. I spent my days hunched over a workbench. My world shrunk to the size of a watch face, coaxing stopped hearts back into a steady rhythm. It was precise work, solitary work. It suited me. I had convinced myself it was enough. Loneliness was a quiet, manageable ache, a tenant I had learned to live with. It paid its rent by not asking for much. But then there were moments like this, a low-murmured instruction from Marcus, and the quiet ache would roar into a sharp, undeniable pang of want. 2 minutes. I counted them in my head, the ticks of the dozens of clocks in his shop serving as a chaotic, unsynchronized metronome. 120 seconds. Enough time for me to second-guess everything. Maybe he'd found a watch with a movement I'd recognize. Maybe he just wanted my opinion on a piece he was thinking of buying. It was always business. It had to be. To imagine anything else was a specific kind of foolishness I reserved for the dark hours just before dawn. He finished with the woman, giving her a handful of crumpled bills for the guitar. He didn't smile. He rarely did. But the corner of his mouth ticked up in a way that signaled the transaction was complete, a deal settled. He caught my eye, a brief, unreadable glance, and then jerked his head toward the beaded curtain behind the counter. The signal. My cue. My palms were damp as I set the watch back on the velvet. I walked around the counter, my worn leather shoes silent on the scuffed linoleum. The shop was a wonderful, claustrophobic maze of other people's histories. Shelves overflowed with tarnished silver, outdated electronics, a menagerie of glass animals. The air was thick with the scent of dust, old paper, and the faint, metallic tang of regret. Pushing through the plastic beads, which clicked softly against my shoulders, felt like crossing a threshold into another world. His office wasn't much of an office. It was a cramped, windowless room filled with more shelves, these ones organized with a meticulousness that belied the chaos of the main floor. Labeled boxes were stacked to the ceiling. A heavy metal desk was clear save for a green blotter, a heavy black telephone, and a single, framed photograph of a rugged, empty coastline. There was one chair for him, and a wooden stool for a guest. For me. He was already there, leaning against the desk, his thick arms crossed over his chest. The single bare bulb overhead carved shadows into the lines around his eyes. He didn't speak, just watched me as I perched on the edge of the stool. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. In this small space, his presence was overwhelming. I could smell the faint, clean scent of soap on his skin and something else, something uniquely him, a mix of sawdust and stale coffee. "I have a job for you, Leo," he finally said. His voice, without the noise of the shop to absorb it, was even deeper. It vibrated in the small space, in the bones of my chest. "A repair?" I asked, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. "More than a repair." He pushed off the desk and walked over to a large, locked metal cabinet in the corner. He worked the combination lock, the clicks of the dial loud in the quiet room. And estate. Old man up on the north end of town passed away. No family. His whole collection is coming to me to liquidate. Clocks. Dozens of them. Mantel clocks, cuckoos, grandfather clocks. Stuff that hasn't run in 50 years. He swung the heavy door open. I need someone to go through all of it. See what's junk, what's salvageable, what's valuable. Clean them. Get them running if you can. I need an inventory and an appraisal for the whole lot. My breath caught. It was the kind of job a man in my profession dreamed of. A whole collection, untouched for decades. A treasure hunt. But it was more than that. It was a reason. A reason to be here, in his space, for days. Maybe weeks. It's a big job, Marcus, I said, trying to sound professional, detached. It would take a lot of time. I'd have to close my shop. I know, he said, not turning from the cabinet. I'll make it worth your while. I'll pay your rate, plus a bonus. And you can work here. In the back. I've got a workbench you can use. Keep the noise and the mess out of your own place. He was offering me an excuse to be near him. My mind raced, stumbling over itself. Don't be an idiot, Leo. It's just business. He trusts your work. That's all. But the bird in my chest was beating its wings against my ribs, frantic and hopeful. He turned back, holding a dusty ledger. He laid it on the desk. This is the preliminary list from the estate lawyer. It's a mess. I stood and moved closer, forcing myself to look at the book, not at him. I leaned over the desk, my shoulder almost brushing his arm. The proximity was electric. I could feel the heat coming off him. I focused on the spidery handwriting in the ledger, the names of manufacturers I hadn't seen in years. Patek Philippe. Jaeger LeCoultre. This is impressive, I murmured, my voice a little shaky. The old man was a collector. A serious 1-inch. He was standing so close now I could see the tiny, faded scar that cut through his left eyebrow. I wondered how he got it. I wondered about 1,000 things I would never have the courage to ask. So, he said, his voice dropping again, pulling my attention from the ledger. I looked up. His faded blue eyes were fixed on me, his expression unreadable, intense. Are you in? Is that what this is? I'm in. I am so far in. Yes, I said, the word coming out a little too fast, a little too eager. Yes, Marcus. I'm in. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was a small thing, barely there, but on his usually stoic face, it felt like a sunrise. Good, he said. Start tomorrow. And just like that, the quiet, predictable rhythm of my life was broken. A new clock had started ticking. The next morning, I arrived 10 minutes before he opened. I carried my own toolkit, a worn leather satchel filled with the delicate instruments that were extensions of my own fingers. The street was quiet, the morning light still soft and gray. The neon open sign in his window was dark. I felt a nervous flutter in my stomach, the kind I hadn't felt since I was a teenager. I was starting a new job. That's what I told myself. It was just a job. He unlocked the heavy glass door from the inside, the jingle of the bell above it sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. He was wearing a plain gray t-shirt that stretched across his chest and a pair of faded jeans. He looked softer without the flannel armor, younger. Morning, Leo, he grunted, stepping aside to let me in. He smelled like fresh coffee. Morning, I replied, stepping into the familiar, cluttered wonderland of his shop. It looked different in the morning light, the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams slanting through the front window. The bench is back here, he said, leading the way. Cleared some space for you. The back room was part workshop, part storage. It smelled of wood glue and metal polish. In the far corner, under a long fluorescent light, was a heavy wooden workbench, its surface scarred with the ghosts of 1,000 other projects. He had cleared it completely. Next to it, on the floor and stacked on pallets, were the clocks. Dozens of wooden and metal corpses, silent and waiting. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking graveyard. Coffee, he asked, already moving toward a battered percolator on a small table. Please, I said, setting my satchel on the bench. I ran a hand over the smooth, worn wood. It felt solid, dependable. He handed me a thick ceramic mug. It was warm. Our fingers brushed as I took it. A tiny, insignificant contact that sent a jolt straight up my arm. I pulled my hand back too quickly. He didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he gave no sign. He just leaned against a stack of boxes, sipping his own coffee, and watched me. I spent the first few hours just taking inventory, moving from clock to clock, my hands gentle on the cold, dusty surfaces. I was in my element here. I could lose myself in the work, in the intricate mechanics and the history held within each piece. I made notes in a small notebook, cataloging each clock, its condition, its potential. Marcus left me alone. The only sounds the scratch of my pen, my own breathing, and the distant, muffled noises of the shop out front, the bell over the door, the low murmur of voices. He was a constant, looming presence. I was acutely aware of him, even when he was out of sight. I could hear the creak of the floorboards as he walked, the solid thud of the cash register drawer. Every so often, he would appear in the doorway to the back room, just watching. He wouldn't say anything. He would just stand there for a minute, his arms crossed, his expression thoughtful. Then he would disappear again. Each time, my focus would shatter. I'd have to force my attention back to the tiny gears and springs in front of me, my heart hammering in my chest. What was he thinking? Was he checking on my work? Or was it something else? I was a man who saw patterns, who understood the logic of complex systems. But Marcus was a system I couldn't decipher. He was a collection of quiet gestures, long silences, and unreadable looks. And I, the patient repairman, was taking him apart in my mind, piece by piece, trying to figure out what made him tick. Around noon, he appeared with 2 sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. "Lunch," he announced, placing them on the corner of my workbench. "Ham and Swiss. Hope that's okay." "It's perfect. Thank you," I said, surprised. "You didn't have to do that." "Easier than you packing up and leaving," he said with a shrug. He didn't leave. He pulled up a rickety stool and sat across from me, unwrapping his own sandwich. We ate in a silence that felt different from the morning's silence. It was less awkward, more companionable. "Find anything interesting yet?" he asked, his mouth full. I swallowed my bite of sandwich. "A few things. This one," I said, gesturing with my head toward a French mantel clock from the late 1800s, its gilded case tarnished to a dull brown. "The movement is a mess, completely seized up. But if I can get it working, it's worth a small fortune. And this German cuckoo clock, the woodwork is hand-carved. It's a work of art." He nodded, listening intently. The old man knew his stuff. He did, I agreed. I felt a sudden urge to fill the silence, to keep him here, talking to me. It's strange, isn't it? A whole life, boiled down to a collection of things that have stopped working. Marcus looked at me, a long, steady look. "Everything stops working eventually, Leo. The trick is finding someone who knows how to fix it." The words hung in the air between us, freighted with a meaning that felt too heavy for a conversation about clocks. He was talking about the objects on my bench, of course. But the way he said it, the way he looked at me, it felt like he was talking about something else entirely. About people. Maybe even about me. My throat felt tight. I took a long drink of water. He finished his sandwich, wadded up the paper, and stood. "Back to it," he said, his voice back to its usual gruffness. And he was gone, leaving me alone with the silent clocks and the loud, frantic beating of my own heart. Days bled into a week, then 2. A new routine established itself. I'd arrive in the morning, he'd have coffee ready. We'd have lunch together at the workbench. I'd work until he closed the shop, and then I'd walk home to my empty apartment, my head full of the scent of his workshop and the sound of his low voice. My world, once confined to my own small shop, had expanded to include his. And him. I learned the rhythms of his day. The mid-morning lull when he'd meticulously polish silver. The afternoon rush of people trying to make a quick buck before the weekend. I learned the different sounds of the bell over the door, the cheerful jingle of a regular, the hesitant tinkle of someone down on their luck. And I watched him. I watched the way his brow furrowed in concentration when he was examining a piece of jewelry through a loop. I watched the patience in his large hands as he untangled a delicate gold chain. I saw him give a young mother $20 more than her ring was worth, telling her it was because it was a nice piece. I saw him stare down a guy who was trying to sell him a clearly stolen laptop, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy calm that made the man back out of the shop without another word. He was a good man, a quiet, steady, complicated man. And with every day I spent in his orbit, the quiet ache of my loneliness sharpened into a specific, focused yearning for him. The touches continued, small and fleeting, but they were my sustenance. A hand on my back to guide me past a stack of boxes. Careful there, his knuckles brushing mine as he passed me a screwdriver. This the one you needed? His shoulder pressing against mine as we both leaned over a particularly stubborn grandfather clock, trying to maneuver its heavy weights. Each time, my skin would burn where he'd touched me. Each time, I would spend hours replaying the moment in my head, analyzing it, trying to mine it for meaning. Was it accidental? Was it just how he was, a casually physical person? Or did it mean more? It was a foolish hope. I knew that. I was just the hired help. The quiet, unassuming clock guy. He was Marcus. Solid. Self-contained. A man who seemed to need nothing and no one. I was reading sonnets into a grocery list. One late afternoon, I was struggling with the mainspring on a large carriage clock. It was a powerful spring, and my hands, though deft, were not strong enough to properly set it in the retaining barrel. I had been fighting with it for 20 minutes, my frustration mounting. Having trouble? His voice came from right behind me. I jumped, startled. I hadn't heard him approach. The spring. I grumbled, wiping a sheen of sweat from my forehead with the back of my wrist. It's fighting me. Let me see. He moved closer, standing directly behind me, boxing me in against the workbench. He was so close I could feel the warmth of his body. He leaned over my shoulder, his head next to mine, to look at the clock's movement. His clean, soap and sawdust scent filled my senses. My breath hitched. "You need more leverage," he murmured, his voice a low vibration near my ear. Here. He didn't take the tool from me. Instead, he placed his large, warm hand over mine on the winding key. His other hand came to rest on my shoulder, a steady, grounding weight. "Easy now," he said. "Turn with me. On 3. 1, 2, 3 inch." We turned the key together. His strength combined with my control was exactly what was needed. The spring clicked perfectly into place. My entire body was rigid, every nerve ending screaming with awareness of his proximity. His hand was still covering mine. His other hand was still on my shoulder. His face was inches from my own. I could hear him breathing, a slow, steady rhythm. I should have moved. I should have thanked him and stepped away. But I was paralyzed, frozen in a moment that felt more real, more charged, than anything I had experienced in years. He didn't move either. For a long, stretched-out second, we just stood there, connected by his hands, by our shared breath in the quiet workshop. My gaze flickered to the side, and I could see his jaw, the dark stubble there, the strong line of his throat. Then, as slowly as he had initiated the contact, he withdrew. He lifted his hand from mine, squeezed my shoulder once, a quick, firm pressure, and then stepped back. The space where he had been standing felt suddenly, achingly cold. "There you go," he said, his voice a little rough. "All set." I couldn't speak. I just nodded, my eyes fixed on the clock, on the now-tamed spring. I heard him turn and walk away, the creak of the floorboards marking his retreat. I finally let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hand was trembling. I am losing my mind. This is just a job. But when I looked down at my hand, the one he had covered with his own, I could still feel the phantom weight and warmth of his touch. It wasn't just a job. Not anymore. The third week began with a storm. It rolled in overnight, a dense blanket of gray cloud that choked the morning light and spat a cold, persistent rain against the windows of the shop. The bell over the door jingled less frequently. The day was quiet, insular. The sound of the rain and the rhythmic ticking of the newly repaired clocks in the back room created a cozy, hypnotic bubble. We worked in our separate spheres, he at the front counter, me at my bench. But the space between us felt smaller, the silence more charged. The incident with the clock's spring had changed something. A line had been blurred. The carefully constructed wall of just business had a crack in it, and I was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. Late in the afternoon, the lights flickered once, twice, and then died. The workshop was plunged into near-total darkness, the only illumination a faint, watery gray light from the shop front. The ticking of the clocks suddenly sounded deafeningly loud, a chorus of tiny heartbeats in the blackness. "Leo." Marcus's voice cut through the dark, closer than I expected. "I'm here," I said, my voice tight. "Stay put. I've got candles." I heard him moving, a series of familiar bumps and scrapes as he navigated the cluttered shop by memory. A few moments later, a small, dancing flame appeared in the doorway, casting his large frame in flickering, dramatic shadow. He held an old, tarnished silver candlestick, the flame making his features look carved and ancient. "Power grid must be down," he said, his voice calm, steady. He walked into the back room and placed the candle on my workbench. The warm, soft light pushed back the shadows, creating a small island of gold in the gloom. He lit a few more, placing them around the room until it was bathed in a gentle, wavering light. "Guess that's it for work today," I said, looking at the delicate clock movement in front of me, now impossible to see clearly. "Looks like it," he agreed. He didn't suggest I go home. He pulled up his usual stool and sat, the candlelight catching the silver in his hair. Nothing to do but wait it out. The rain drummed a relentless rhythm on the roof. We sat in silence for a long time, watching the candle flames dip and sway. It should have been awkward, but it wasn't. It was peaceful. The world outside, with its demands and its routines, had disappeared. It was just us. Just the two of us in the quiet, flickering dark. My heart picked up its pace. "Do you ever think about where all this stuff comes from?" I asked, my voice softer than usual, a near whisper. I gestured vaguely at the shadowy shapes of the clocks around us, the lives they were a part of. Marcus stared into the flame of the nearest candle, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes," he said, "sometimes a piece comes in and you can feel the history on it. A wedding ring worn thin. A kid's first guitar. This place, it's full of stories. Most of them sad. Why do you do it?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Surround yourself with sad stories." He was quiet for a moment, then he looked at me. His eyes, in the candlelight, seemed darker, deeper. "Because every now and then, you get to give one a happy ending. You reunite someone with a stolen locket. You sell that guitar to another kid who looks at it like it's the whole world. You give things a second chance." He paused. "And sometimes, the stories aren't sad. They're just over. Like the old man with these clocks. He loved them. He spent a lifetime with them. Now they're here. They just need someone to wind them up again." His words were simple, but they resonated deep inside me. He wasn't just a merchant of used goods. He was a custodian of memories, a broker of second chances. He saw the potential, the life still left in things others had discarded. A dangerous hope began to bloom in my chest. Maybe he saw that in people, too. "You're good at it," he said, his gaze steady on me, winding them up again. The compliment landed with a quiet weight, warming me from the inside out. "It's all I know how to do," I confessed. "Take broken things and try to make them whole." "Nothing wrong with that," he said softly. "It's an honorable trade." The intimacy of the moment was overwhelming. The darkness, the shared confidences, his unexpected softness. It was too much. I felt a desperate need to know more, to push past the careful boundaries we had always maintained. "What about you, Marcus?" I asked, the question tumbling out before I could stop it. "What's your story?" He looked away, back at the candle flame. The muscles in his jaw tightened. For a second, I thought I had gone too far, that he would shut down, retreat back into his stoic shell. "Not much of one," he said, his voice low. "Grew up here. Joined the army. Saw some things I'd rather forget. Came home. My dad had this shop. He passed, and I took it over. That's it." It was a condensed, clinical summary of a life, but it was more than he had ever told me before. I could feel the weight of the things he left out, the things he'd rather forget. I suddenly understood the source of the weariness I sometimes saw in his eyes. He was a man who carried his own ghosts. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "Don't be," he said, turning back to me. The hard look was gone, replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. "It is what it is. We all carry something." His eyes searched mine, a silent question in their depths. "What do you carry, Leo?" I couldn't answer. The story of my own quiet, unlived life felt too small, too pathetic to share. The story of my loneliness, of the love I'd never had the courage to seek. But in his gaze, I felt a flicker of understanding. Maybe he already knew. Maybe he saw the broken parts of me, too. The lights flickered back on with a sudden, humming buzz. The harsh fluorescent glare washed out the soft candlelight, chasing away the magic of the moment. The bubble was broken. We both blinked, momentarily blinded, as the workshop returned to its normal, mundane self. Marcus cleared his throat and pushed himself up from the stool. "Well, back to it, I guess," he said, his voice back to its usual businesslike tone. He began blowing out the candles, one by one, plunging us back into a more familiar kind of light. But something had shifted, irrevocably. He had let me see a glimpse behind the wall, and I knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified me, that I could never go back to just being the clock guy. I wanted to know all the stories he kept locked away. I wanted to be the one who could help him carry his ghosts. The days following the power outage were thick with an unspoken tension. We fell back into our routine, but the comfortable silence was gone, replaced by an awareness that crackled in the space between us. We were more careful around each other, our movements more deliberate, as if we were navigating a room full of invisible tripwires. The casual touches stopped altogether. I missed them with an ache that was sharp and constant. I tried to focus on the work. I was nearing the end of the project. The graveyard of clocks was slowly transforming into a functioning chorus. The back room was filled with a gentle, chaotic symphony of ticking, chiming, and the occasional, startling cuckoo. I should have felt a sense of accomplishment, but all I felt was a looming sense of dread. Soon, the job would be over. My reason for being here, in his space, would be gone. I would have to pack up my tools and walk back to my quiet, empty life, and the thought was unbearable. The tipping point came on a Thursday. It was a busy afternoon. I was in the main shop, helping Marcus move a heavy grandfather clock I had just finished repairing into a display position near the front window. We were shuffling it carefully, my back to the door, when the bell jingled. "I'll be with you in a moment," Marcus called out over his shoulder, his voice strained with effort. "Take your time," a man's sneering voice replied. "Wouldn't want you two to hurt yourselves. That's a nice-looking piece. Bet some faggot in the Heights would pay a fortune for that." The slur, so casual and ugly, hit me like a physical blow. I froze, my hands locked onto the clock. A cold, familiar shame washed over me. This was the world outside our quiet workshop, the world where I was an object of contempt. I instinctively braced myself for what would come next, the snickering, the knowing looks. My first impulse was to become invisible, to shrink into myself until I disappeared. But Marcus didn't miss a beat. He didn't turn around. His voice, when he spoke, was dangerously low, a growl that vibrated through the wood of the clock we were both holding. "Set it down, Leo," he said softly. We gently lowered the clock to the floor. Then he turned. I had never seen his face look like that. All the weariness, all the quiet patience, was gone. His expression was pure, cold granite. He took a slow step toward the man, who was leaning against the counter, a smirk on his face. The man was wiry and small, and Marcus seemed to grow, to fill the entire shop with a silent, menacing authority. "We don't use that kind of language in here," Marcus said. It wasn't a request. It was a command. The man's smirk faltered. "Hey, man, just making an observation." "Get out," Marcus said, his voice dropping even lower. Now, the man's eyes darted from Marcus's face to me, standing frozen by the clock. A flicker of ugly realization dawned in his eyes. He opened his mouth to say something else, but Marcus took another step forward, and the man seemed to think better of it. He pushed himself off the counter, mumbled something under his breath, and scurried out of the shop, the bell mocking him with a cheerful jingle. The silence he left behind was absolute. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was staring at the floorboards, at a crack in the linoleum, anywhere but at Marcus. The shame was a hot, suffocating blanket. He had heard. He had defended me. And now he knew. Or, if he hadn't known before, he certainly suspected now. I heard his heavy footsteps cross the floor. He stopped in front of me. I kept my eyes down, waiting for the pity, the awkwardness, the inevitable distancing. "Leo," his voice was soft, stripped of its anger. I couldn't look at him. "Leo, look at me." Slowly, reluctantly, I lifted my head. His face was no longer hard. The granite had softened. His faded blue eyes were filled with a concern that was so genuine, so intense, it made my throat ache. "You okay?" he asked. It was a simple question. 3 words. But the subtext was a novel. He wasn't just asking about the man, the slur. He was asking about everything. He was seeing the years of fear and invisibility I carried around with me. He was seeing me. I tried to form a word, a nod, anything, but nothing would come out. A terrible, hot pressure was building behind my eyes. I was going to fall apart, right here, in the middle of his shop. He must have seen it in my face. He reached out, not with a fleeting touch, but with a deliberate, certain motion. He placed his hand on the back of my neck. His thumb stroked the tense muscle there, a slow, soothing rhythm. The gesture was so unexpected, so shockingly tender, it shattered the last of my composure. A single, hot tear escaped and traced a path down my cheek. I squeezed my eyes shut, mortified. "Hey," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "It's all right. He's gone. You're safe here. You're safe here." The words undid me. He didn't pull away. He didn't treat me like I was something fragile or broken. He just stood there, his hand a warm, solid anchor on my neck, until the trembling in my shoulders subsided. Finally, I managed a shaky breath. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Nothing to thank me for," he said gruffly, but his thumb continued its gentle ministrations. "No one talks like that in my shop. To anyone." He was giving me an out, a way to pretend this was about his principles and not about me. But we both knew it was a lie. He had stood between me and the ugliness of the world. He had been my shield. He finally let his hand drop, and the loss of contact was immediate and profound. He stepped back, putting a little space between us. He looked around the shop, then flipped the sign on the door from open to closed, even though it was still the middle of the afternoon. He locked the door. "Day's over," he said, not looking at me. "Let's close up." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced normalcy. We worked in near silence, tidying the shop, turning off the lights. The air was thick with everything that hadn't been said. The question hung between us, unspoken but deafening. What now? I finished packing up my tools at the workbench. This was it. The last clock was repaired. The inventory was complete. The job was done. My throat felt tight with unshed tears. I had to leave now. I had to walk out that door and never come back, because I didn't know how to face him tomorrow. I didn't know how to go back to being just the clock guy after he had touched my neck with such tenderness, after he had looked at me with such raw concern. I picked up my satchel. It felt impossibly heavy. "Well," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I guess that's everything." He was standing by the door to the office, his form silhouetted against the dim light from the front of the shop. I couldn't see his expression. "You did good work, Leo," he said, his voice flat. "Thanks for the opportunity," I said, the formal words tasting like ash in my mouth. I took a step toward the front door, toward my old life. "Leo," I stopped, my back to him. "Don't go." The words were quiet, but they landed with the force of a physical blow. I turned around slowly. He hadn't moved. "I don't understand," I whispered. "I think you do," he said. He took a step out of the shadows, and I could see his face now. He looked tired and scared, and more vulnerable than I had ever seen him. "The job is done. I know, but I don't want you to go." My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I was sure he could hear it across the room. Hope, wild and terrifying, surged through me. This was the precipice, the moment where everything could change or break completely. I took a hesitant step toward him. Why? I needed to hear him say it. I needed to be sure I wasn't imagining all of this, that I hadn't built a fantasy out of a few kind gestures and a power outage. He closed the distance between us in 3 long strides. He stopped directly in front of me, so close I had to tilt my head back to look at him. He lifted a hand, as if to touch my face, but then let it drop to his side. His gaze was intense, searching. "Because when you're here," he said, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't name. "The ticking isn't so loud." He paused, seeming to struggle for the right words. "Because you see the value in things people throw away. Because I'm tired of this place being full of sad stories, Leo." He reached out then, his big, calloused hand coming up to cup my jaw. His touch was hesitant, but warm. His thumb brushed against my cheek, right where the tear had been. I want a new one. And that was it. The breaking point. All the weeks of watching, of yearning, of analyzing every glance and every touch, it all culminated in this one, shattering moment of confession. The air crackled. The world narrowed to the space between us, to the feeling of his rough skin against mine, to the look in his eyes that was no longer unreadable, but was filled with a raw, terrifying hope that mirrored my own. I leaned into his touch, a small, involuntary movement. It was all the encouragement he needed. He lowered his head, slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. I met him halfway, rising on my toes, my eyes fluttering shut. His lips were firm, and tasted faintly of coffee. It wasn't a passionate, desperate kiss. It was slow. It was searching. It was a question and an answer all at once. It was a kiss that felt like coming home after a long, lonely journey. His other hand came up to my waist, pulling me gently against his solid frame. I wrapped my own arms around his neck, my fingers tangling in the short, soft hair at his nape. For the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly seen. I wasn't the quiet clock guy. I wasn't a project to be fixed. I was just Leo, and it was enough. He deepened the kiss, a low groan rumbling in his chest. It was a sound of relief, of surrender. All the tension, all the unspoken words of the past weeks melted away in that one, honest connection. There was no pretense, no performance. Just us. Just this. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes still closed. His hands were laced behind my back, holding me close. I could feel the steady, strong beat of his heart against my chest, a rhythm far more comforting than any of my clocks. "Leo," he whispered, his voice thick. It was all he said, but my name on his lips felt like a prayer. "Marcus," I breathed back, my own voice shaky. We stood like that for a long time, in the quiet, dimly lit shop, surrounded by the ghosts of other people's lives, finally starting a story of our own. The fear was still there, a faint tremor in the background, but it was overshadowed by a feeling so vast and overwhelming I couldn't put a name to it. It felt like relief. It felt like hope. It felt like a second chance. The morning after was a study in awkwardness. I woke up on the lumpy sofa in his office, a thick wool blanket tucked around me. I didn't remember falling asleep, but I remembered talking for hours, sitting on the dusty floor, our backs against a shelf of old books. We talked about everything and nothing, his time in the army, my solitary childhood, the best way to repair a cuckoo's bellows. It had been easy, natural. But in the harsh light of a new day, doubt began to creep in. The shop was cold and silent. I could hear Marcus moving around in the main room, the familiar sounds of him preparing to open for the day. I sat up, my body stiff, my head fuzzy. What had we done? Last night felt like a dream, a feverish, impossible fantasy. Today felt like reality, with its potential for regret and second thoughts. I folded the blanket carefully and placed it on the sofa cushion. I ran a hand through my messy hair and walked through the beaded curtain. He was behind the counter, pouring coffee into two familiar ceramic mugs. He didn't look at me. "Morning," he grunted, his back still to me. "Morning," I replied, my voice small. The air was thick with a new kind of tension, a fragile, uncertain silence. I stood awkwardly by the end of the counter, unsure of what to do, what to say. My satchel of tools was still on the workbench, a painful reminder that my official business here was concluded. He turned and pushed a mug across the counter toward me. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. He focused on adding sugar to his own coffee, stirring it with intense concentration. My heart sank. He regretted it. It was a moment of weakness, of loneliness, and now, in the light of day, he was putting the walls back up. I felt a fool. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, the silence stretching between us until it was a physical weight. I had to say something, to break the spell before it suffocated me. I should probably get my things and go, I said, the words catching in my throat. He stopped stirring. He looked up, and his eyes finally met mine. The fear I saw in them was a mirror of my own. He wasn't regretting it. He was just as terrified as I was. He put his spoon down and walked around the counter until he was standing in front of me. He didn't touch me. He just looked at me, his gaze searching, serious. "I woke up this morning," he said, his voice low and deliberate. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. He took a breath. "Last night wasn't a mistake, Leo. Just so you know." The relief that washed over me was so profound my knees felt weak. A shaky smile touched my lips. "Me neither," I whispered. He reached out then, and took the coffee mug from my trembling hands, setting it on the counter. Then he took my hand in his. His grasp was warm, solid, and sure. He laced his fingers through mine, a simple, declarative gesture that said more than any speech could. It was a reassurance, a promise. "But," he said, a faint, wry smile touching his own lips, "I have no idea what we do now." I laughed, a real, genuine laugh of relief. "Me neither." And that was okay. For the first time, not knowing what came next didn't feel scary. It felt hopeful. The test came sooner than I expected. The finished clocks were my anchor, my reason for being there, and now that anchor was gone. I spent the morning packing my tools, cleaning the workbench until it was clear and empty again. Every action felt final, a step toward an exit I no longer wanted to take. We navigated the day with a quiet, careful intimacy. We didn't talk about what happened or what would happen next, but he would find reasons to be in the back room, to stand near me. He'd bring me a rag I didn't need. He'd ask my opinion on a tarnished silver locket. And every so often, his hand would brush mine, a fleeting, deliberate contact that sent a current through me. By late afternoon, I couldn't put it off any longer. My satchel was packed. The workbench was clean. There was no reason for me to stay. "I'm all packed up," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He was polishing the glass on the front counter, his movements slow, methodical. He didn't look up. Okay. The single word was a blow. Okay. Was that it? After everything? My fragile hope began to crumble. Maybe I had misread everything. Maybe the morning's reassurance was just him being kind, letting me down easy. I picked up my satchel. "Well, thank you again for the work. It was a great project." My voice was stiff, formal. I was retreating to familiar territory, to the safety of a business transaction. I walked toward the door. Each step was leaden. My hand was on the doorknob when his voice stopped me. "Wait." I turned. He had come out from behind the counter. He was holding a single, old-fashioned brass key. "The apartment upstairs has been empty for a year," he said, his voice even. "Ever since the old tenant passed. I haven't gotten around to renting it out." He took a step toward me. "It's quiet. The light is good in the afternoon. Plenty of space for a workbench." He stopped in front of me and held out the key. "The rent's cheap, if you want it." I stared at the key lying in his palm. It wasn't just a key to an apartment. It was a key to a future. It was an invitation. It was a conscious choice. He wasn't just offering me a place to live. He was offering me a place in his life. My eyes filled with tears, but this time, they weren't tears of shame or sadness. They were tears of overwhelming, unexpected joy. I didn't say anything. I just reached out and took the key from his hand. Our fingers brushed, and this time, neither of us pulled away. I curled my hand around the cool metal, holding it tight. A slow, genuine smile spread across Marcus's face, reaching his eyes and making them shine. "Good," he said softly. "That's good." Moving in was a simple affair. I didn't have much. A few boxes of books, my clothes, and the tools of my trade. Marcus helped me, carrying the heaviest boxes up the creaking staircase at the back of the shop. He never once complained about the weight. The apartment was just as he described it. 2 large rooms with high ceilings and tall windows that looked out over the quiet side street. It was dusty and smelled of disuse, but it was filled with a warm, afternoon light. It had potential. It had a future. We spent the first few days cleaning and painting. We worked together, a comfortable rhythm developing between us. We didn't talk much, but the silence was easy, filled with the sounds of our shared labor, the scrape of putty knives, the slosh of paint rollers, the low murmur of a radio playing in the corner. In the evenings, we'd collapse on a drop cloth on the floor, sharing a pizza out of the box, our bodies tired and splattered with paint. In these quiet moments, we started to learn each other. I learned that he loved old westerns. He learned that I couldn't cook to save my life. I learned about the stray dog he'd had as a kid. He learned about my failed attempts at art school. We were filling in the outlines of each other's lives, adding color and texture to the sketches we'd made. One evening, we were sitting on the newly purchased secondhand sofa, the windows open to the cool night air. The apartment was clean now, starting to look like a home. My workbench was set up under the largest window, my tools laid out in neat, orderly rows. Marcus was quiet, staring out the window. I could tell something was on his mind. "What is it?" I asked gently. He turned to me, his expression serious. I'm not good at this, Leo," he said, gesturing vaguely between us. "Words, feelings, all of it. You don't have to be," I said, my heart aching for his vulnerability. "I'm not either. I just want you to know," he said, his voice low and earnest, "that this." He took my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. "This is real for me. I don't want you to ever think it's not." I leaned over and kissed him, a soft, reassuring press of my lips to his. "I know," I whispered against his mouth. "It's real for me, too." The final pieces of my old life were moved, and a new, quiet domesticity settled over us. My world was no longer silent. It was filled with the sounds of his life intertwining with mine. The heavy tread of his boots on the stairs at the end of the day. The low rumble of his voice as he talked to customers downstairs. The sound of his breathing next to me in the dark. One Saturday morning, I woke to the smell of bacon and coffee. I walked into the small kitchen to find Marcus at the stove, a faded apron tied around his waist. He looked completely out of place and yet perfectly at home. He glanced over his shoulder and gave me that small, rare smile that always made my heart flip over. "Morning," he said. "Breakfast is almost ready." I came up behind him and wrapped my arms around his waist, resting my cheek against his broad, warm back. He leaned into my embrace, continuing to flip the bacon with a steady hand. We stood like that for a moment, a simple, perfect picture of a life I never thought I would have. Later, we sat on the sofa, drinking coffee and watching the morning light fill the room. The apartment was quiet, the shop below not yet open. It was our time. His arm was around my shoulders, and my head was resting against his chest. I could feel the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heart. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. I thought back to the man I was just a few months ago, the lonely clockmaker who believed his life was a collection of broken parts that could never be made whole. I had been so convinced that my story was over. But Marcus, the quiet custodian of second chances, had shown me that it was just waiting for someone to come along and wind it back up. He shifted, his lips brushing against my hair. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured. I tilted my head back to look at him, at his kind, weary eyes, at the face I had come to love more than I thought possible. "I was just thinking," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face, "that I'm finally home."